Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Michael Benson tweeted, Eddie Hearn on WBC Dillian Whyte. He's not suspended by NADP, UCAD, or the British Board of Boxing Control. So why should the WBC suspend him? Agenda? Pressure? 600 days to become a mandatory. They've moved very fast to make sure he's suspended without actually getting any facts. And if you cross-reference what Eddie Hearn is saying with what the WBC said a couple of days ago, one or two, the WBC themselves, they're not saying that Dillian Whyte tested positive for Dianabol. Nowhere in their official statement does it say that.
Interesting.
Now, in Thomas Hauser's story, it says that. In Thomas Hauser's story, it says a lot of things. But if you look at the powers that be, the WBC, who have so chosen to suspend Dillian Whyte, they're not saying this guy tested positive for Dianabol. They're not saying they found 2 different performance-enhancing drugs or banned substances in this guy's body. They're not saying that. They're saying that there was an adverse finding. That's important. The fact that the WBC themselves are not using that kind of language, they're not making that kind of a determination just yet, whereas Thomas Hauser already has, it's important. In this kind of a situation where there is so much legalese and legalities involved, possible penalties, it's important to note what exactly is being said. And the WBC themselves, they didn't say that Dillian Whyte tested positive for this or that. They just said it was an adverse finding. Now, to address Eddie Hearn's statement that these guys are kind of jumping the gun, where by all rights, a man is supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. In the case of Dillian Whyte, it very much seems to be the opposite. He's already being branded as guilty, and everything else just seems like a formality.
Pretty much.
Is there any truth in that? When Eddie Hearn says this, is he saying this because he's partial to Dillian Whyte, or is he saying it because that's the case? Let's discuss it. I'll say up front, the WBC didn't jump to these kinds of determinations and conclusions this quickly when it was about Canelo Alvarez. Hell, they called him innocent before they even conducted their investigation, whereas with Dillian, they're operating as if he's guilty already before their investigation has even started or concluded. So there does seem to be a difference between how the WBC is treating this situation and other situations in the past. If we're gonna look for the kind of double standards that might characterize what Eddie Hearn's describing, if we're gonna look for that, I'd say that the case of Luis Nery communicates those double standards the best. Luis Nery ended up going to Japan, fighting Yamanaka, what was then the WBC champion. He beat him from pillar to post. After the fight, this guy tests positive for a banned substance, weight-cutting agent. Test positive. Now, as a result of testing positive, and it wasn't like this situation, the news came from VADA. The news broke when the anti-doping agency themselves notified all the affected parties.
Okay.
In that situation with Luis Nery, it was confirmed, yeah, this guy tested positive for a banned substance. Now, in that situation, did the WBC strip Luis Nery upon hearing that news? No, they didn't strip him. They didn't rescind his status as a champion. He wasn't removed from their rank standings, even though it was conclusive and it was a finite matter that there is a banned substance present in this guy's body. They didn't rescind his status. They didn't take his belt. Whereas with Dillian Whyte, we don't even know what is or what isn't in this guy's body, but you've already suspended him before your investigation, quote unquote, has even concluded. So when Eddie Hearn says that, yeah, these guys are branding him as guilty until proven innocent, yeah, I see what he's talking about. Because I didn't do that with Nery. And what was Nery's excuse? The age-old tainted taco meat. The tainted street meat. Oh, I ate a bad taco and something. I got a little bit of gas. I had to take some Maalox. And that was enough for the WBC to let him hold on to the green belt. Luis Nery didn't lose the green belt as a result of testing positive for a banned substance. That's not even how he lost it. He lost it blowing weight ahead of the rematch with Yamanaka. That's how he lost the green belt. But as far as him losing it because he tested positive, that's not the stance that the WBC took. So why are they jumping the gun with Dillian Whyte? It's almost like you're doing everything you can to rescind his position as the mandatory challenger so he never gets that Wilder fight. That's what it looks like. I mean, at least wait until your quote-unquote investigation is concluded before you go handing out a ruling. You seem to have handed out the ruling before there's even been a hearing. Now, is this the first time that the WBC would have treated Dillian Whyte differently and made things more difficult for him than they have for other fighters in the past? Would this be the first time? No, of course not. Bermane Stiverne tested positive for a banned substance, yet he was still eligible to become a mandatory challenger, and he subsequently did. Without a contest, I might add. That guy, he didn't have to wait 600 days. As the number one contender, he didn't have to wait 600 days to get a shot to become a mandatory. He was fast-tracked to that position. Dominic Breazeale, this guy, he was number 6, and then he was number 4, and somehow he got a mandatory spot ahead of the guy that was already seated at number 1. He got a title shot before Dillian Whyte did. So if we're looking for indications that the WBC often treats Dillian Whyte differently than they treat other fighters, oh yeah, the proof's in the pudding. I mean, if the question is, has the WBC made things harder for Dillian Whyte than they have for other fighters? Oh, the answer is yes, undoubtedly, yes. Now, this situation may be being used by the WBC to keep doing what they've been doing, which is preventing Dillian Whyte from getting a shot at Deontay Wilder. That seems to be the case. And now that reports are coming out, reports are circulating that Dillian Whyte passed all his VADA tests. VADA, who helps the WBC co-run the clean boxing program, that really drives the point home, doesn't it? That the WBC, when they decided to suspend Dillian Whyte and rescind his status as the mandatory challenger, they were jumping the gun. Because as far as VADA is concerned, VADA, who helps you run the clean boxing program, this guy didn't test positive for nothing, so why'd you suspend him? You know that VADA doesn't have teeth like the British Board of Boxing Control and UCAT and the DPAN or whatever. They don't got teeth. All they can do is report the findings based on what tests they conduct. They can't rescind a guy's status. It's up to the WBC to receive word from VADA of any adverse findings, anything that might be sketchy, out of the ordinary. It's up to them to receive word from VADA first and then act accordingly based on what the findings are, whereas what VADA's findings are that there's nothing to find. Dillian Whyte passed his tests before the fight and subsequently after the fight. Which begs the question, okay, so what was the WBC thinking in suspending this guy, what appears to be, preemptively? Throughout the duration of this fiasco, I maintained a neutral position because there are many scenarios that seem not only probable but plausible to me. That it's possible that Dillian Whyte is just a dirty fighter, the way a lot of guys are dirty fighters, but just as well, it's also possible that Thomas Hauser may have jumped the gun because he has before. And when the story panned out, it wasn't the way that he was telling it. Now, these reports that are coming out in the last 12 hours seem to indicate that Dillian Whyte, as far as VADA was concerned, was a clean fighter. He passed his VADA tests before and after the fight. And this lends credence to the notion that the WBC, when they decided to do what they did, when they decided to suspend this guy, it couldn't have been because of a preponderance of evidence. They were suspending him on the premise of allegations, which further denotes the biased and unfair treatment that he's experienced while climbing up their ranks and trying to secure a mandatory position. I mean, if this doesn't really drive the point home, I don't know what will. I mean, the WBC didn't treat Luis Neri's case like this, and that's a guy who actually did test positive via the testing conducted by VADA. This guy actually did turn up having something in his system, but they didn't rescind his status as a champion, so why'd they go ahead and do that with Dillian Whyte? I'll tell you why. Because they're trying to stop Dillian Whyte from getting a shot at Deontay Wilder. They're doing everything they can. So when this news broke, in spite of it just being allegations that had not yet been substantiated by either UCAD or VADA, in spite of them just being allegations, that was enough for the WBC to look at that as a window of opportunity to guide Whyte away from Wilder. God only knows why, because even I think it's a fight that Wilder can win. Even I think that Wilder has what it takes to knock out Dillian Whyte. But you know what? For some reason or another, there are clandestine forces at work that are trying to prevent such a fight from happening. And this is yet another chapter in the same fucking book. In other news, Savannah Marshall, super middleweight contender Savannah Marshall, who's the only girl that can say she sports a victory of any kind over Clarissa Shields, has just signed to MATCHROOM. And I'll tell you why this is good news. I'll tell you why this lends itself to building what could be the super fight between Savannah Marshall and Clarissa Shields. Savannah Marshall, whose base style is actually more adept to the task than what was Christina Hammer's base style. Now, we're not going to get into nuts and bolts. If you want nuts and bolts, I'll leave the link to that video in the description box as far as why Savannah Marshall may pose more issues inside of the ring to Clarissa than Christina did. What we're going to discuss here is why this lends itself to help making the fight. DAZN reaches a lot of people. You got to realize that. You got a platform where both Canelo Alvarez, Gennady Golovkin, Daniel Jacobs, a lot of, just a lot of the middleweights, just a lot of guys overall. Anybody who's interested in seeing someone fight from Canelo to Usyk, they've got this platform. This is where they're getting their boxing. So if you just so happen to be an up-and-coming contender who strikes a deal and will also be featured on the same platform as those fighters, that lends itself to your exposure. In this case, the exposure of Savannah Marshall. Savannah Marshall, who's got a very fan-friendly style. She's not a long-distance, long-range, outside kinds of fighter that's just looking to win a points decision. She's looking to hurt the other girl when she goes in there, and she's got the tools to do it. Upon laying eyes on Savannah Marshall, I think what a lot of people will find is they like what they see, and it's genuinely entertaining, and she does pose a threat to Claressa Shields. Claressa Shields, who appears to be going down to the junior middleweight division, what will be her third weight class that she fights in, could be the third weight class she wins a title in, too. Her fight against Ivana Habazin, that's been postponed to the fall. We know that Claressa, she got an injury, and she was supposed to be contesting for the vacant WBO title at 154. That fight could see Claressa becoming a 3-division champion, but better still, behind the scenes, what's in the works could be a Savannah Marshall fight. And with Savannah now being a part of Matchroom and potentially fighting on this platform stateside, likely Sky Sports over there in the UK, with her having that avenue of opportunity to build her own name and her own brand, that lends itself to making the Claressa Shields fight a reality, a real and tangible reality. Because there's going to be a demand for that fight. Right now, a lot of people don't know Savannah. They don't know what she's all about.
But very soon they will.
But once they do, they're going to start asking for that Claressa Shields fight. And this helps make that much more possible. While Claressa Shields is down there campaigning at 154 pounds, it's possible that Savannah Marshall could see herself becoming a world champion anywhere between 168 and 160. Those world titles that Claressa used to hold in those weight classes, she's not going to be able to hang on to them. She already gave up the ones that she had at 168, and it's conceivable she's about to give up the ones she had at 160. So all those different world titles are going to get redistributed, become available for the contenders to fight for. And Savannah just so happens to be one of those contenders. Now put your thinking cap on. Use your imagination. What if Savannah Marshall were to square off against Christina Hammer for one of the vacant titles, what could become the vacant titles at 160? And what if Savannah were to beat Christina Hammer in better fashion than Claressa did? Claressa beat her one-sided. Whole fight, one-sided. But what happens if Savannah goes in there and stops her? That's going to really build up that fight, wouldn't you say? There were a lot of opportunities with the right backing, and that's what Savannah Marshall has got. She's got the talent, she's got the tools, she's got the backing, and she's got the platform. So this is very, very welcome news. And finally, in other news, Teofimo Lopez addresses a potential delay in his fight with Richard Comey. That rhymed. The title shot that he earned in defeating Masayoshi Nakatani in what was an IBF final eliminator, a performance that got a lot of criticism. And per Teofimo Lopez himself, he feels that his performance wasn't really up to scratch. He cited issues making weight, internal issues between his family, his family that was largely his support system upon his ascension to where he is today, but you know how things have changed based on those internal rifts. Rifts I'm sure you guys are all aware of per the broadcast. They talked about it. They weren't too happy that he married that girl. They don't like that girl. Something's going on there. And just, how all of this may affect him in the ring. That, that Comey fight, they might have to, take their foot off the gas a bit for that one. And to that, I'll say this. I wasn't too hard on Teofimo Lopez
post-fight
in regards to his performance because my expectations of him were never very high to begin with. I looked at him as a kid who's green. He's doing what guys usually do when they're in that situation, calling out a big name, targeting a big fight, but as to whether or not they're actually ready for that is quite another matter. And Teofimo, I've said this already on the channel, that this is a guy who needs to earn his stripes, that if you're trying to fight Vasyl Lomachenko, you're going to need to have these experiences. You're going to need to go through the gauntlet because as it stands today, you don't got the kind of amateur background that he's got. He's got, Teofimo has a good amateur background and he's doing what he's supposed to do as a professional, but it's not on par with what Vasyl Lomachenko is doing and what Vasyl Lomachenko comes from. In many ways, the burden placed before Team Lopez is a burden that they placed on themselves. You were the guys running around talking about Lomachenko. You were the guys saying fuck that guy and he's scared of me and we had to move hotels. You guys remember the kind of talk that was going around? Yet all of that seems to be changing. Now we're seeing a more diplomatic approach. The Teofimo feels that he can beat all of these guys, but he's got to take care of these issues first. Issues making weight and issues in his family. These are just my thoughts. If Teofimo Lopez is to stand any kind of a chance against the best and brightest fighters in the lightweight division, he's got to have some kind of harmony. He's got to have peace so that he can then gain focus. It has to be something that he really wants, not something that is a byproduct or a consequence of things he said in the past, but something that he as a fighter genuinely wants. It has to be a place where he wants to be, because if it is anything other than that, then this kid's career could get derailed before it even takes off. He's gotten himself a lot of attention with his performances and the things that he said, but those things that he has said, him and his father have said in the past, they now seem to be more of a bane, a consequence, something that could hinder him. You wonder where his mind is at right now, you know? But this much is certain. If he is to stand any kind of a chance against the best and brightest fighters in the lightweight division, he needs focus and he needs to want to be there. Not being there because you feel obligated to be there based on things you said in the past, not some shit like that, but that you actually want to be there. You want to prove you're the best. Not, I said it before, so now I gotta follow through. No, you gotta wanna be there. It's not enough to secure the victories, you know? It's not. It's not enough to secure the victories. He secured the victory against Masayoshi Nakatani. He did. But what kind of odds do you give him against Richard Comey? And what kind of odds do you give him against Vasyl Lomachenko? I mean, you got the victory, right? But does that mean you give him good odds to win those fights? Comey would be a real test for Teofimo Lopez. He would be a genuine test. He could test his chin. That much we can deduce. So what I'm left thinking most of all ahead of this news is Teofimo has some really big decisions that he needs to make as to how much he really wants to stay in the lightweight division and how much does he really want to stand before Vasyl Lomachenko and contest for what Vasyl Lomachenko's got. Before, he was saying that shit and it all sounded good. But now you're getting to the point to where it's becoming a reality. And the question then becomes, how bad do you really want that?